Hi, it's Writing Wednesday. It is the week before Christmas. It is the day of the impeachment vote. Um, it has been a kind of a sucky week. A an amazing member of the LA writing community, journalist Scott Timberg, died last week, 50 years old. He had been caught up in, an incredible journalist, cultural critic. He had written a book that kind of clarified the impact that the new realities of journalism, the vanishing of jobs. He was let go from the Times in 2008, I think, in the crash. Lost his house, had to leave LA. And he wrote a book that every writer should read, every culture worker should read, called Culture Crash, The Killing of the Creative Class. So he was an incredible writer. I went to his memorial yesterday, and there's a picture of Scott. If you haven't met him, he was just a great person, the kind of person that you would see at a party and you'd, I have to go talk to Scott, see what he was into. He had the gift of bringing you into a conversation. He knew about just about everything, books and music and politics and whatever was going on. He loved LA. And he had equal capacity for great enthusiasm and for absolute outrage. I mean, somebody said at the memorial yesterday that he cared about everything intensely. And as we all know, to care is to be alive, and he was intensely alive, but it's also, that's a risk. There is an emotional toll for caring, as we know, as we're watching this insane impeachment thing. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of Scott and in terms of our time is about literary community, about community. When we feel that we're out in the outer planets, despair takes us, our energy disappears. We're no longer in a creative state. We're no longer in a state where we feel we can contribute anything. It just all seems to be coming to an end. And as many of you know, I like to think I live on the bright side. I like to think that, good things are coming, and think the best of everything, and blah, blah, blah. But there are times where you just don't, And at those times, I turn to the Stoics. And the Stoics are very much, it is what it is. And, they base the 12-step recovery program a lot on Stoic philosophy, which is, you change the things that you can change, that you have the energy to change, that you are going to go after. And then things that you cannot change should be, his book, Scott, this is a question about Scott's book. The name is Culture Crash, The Killing of the Creative Class. And I'd like to talk something about the subject matter of Scott, but I just want to say also that there is something to be said for a more stoic approach to life, that, we hyper optimistic people like myself fall into despair when we take a look at the possibility that things are not going to get any better, that this is the ride we're on. We're riding on the horse of history, and it's going to be what it is. And, to not make things worse by the feeling that things should be. This is not fair. This is not right. It's not right. It's not right. But to remind ourselves that things that, terrible conditions have existed in human life. Most of human existence has not been all that great. And, to expect that it's always going to be good is definitely leaves us open to crushing despair, and which is not going to help anything. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help your work. It's not going to help your voice. We were talking about Olga Tokarczuk last week, who won the Nobel. And every story that's lost is an absolute loss of a world. It's an erasure of part of existence. So, the matter is how to take these blows that are happening all around us and moving forward. What do you do? And some of it has to do with literary community. As I went to his service yesterday, I looked around and I realized you don't realize you're in a community until you lose somebody in that community. And it's like, wow, this is a community. I look around and I knew a lot of the people at his service, and that is something you don't think about much, is that, we talk about forming community and something we need to do, blah, blah, blah. But it never occurred to me that I was already in a community. I mean, these are the people who will come to my service when it's my turn. How, as somebody who always felt like they were circling the outer planets, and my, who would notice if I was there or not. And I know a lot of writers have that problem, and especially when we're struggling, especially when, we wonder if we're ever going to see a publication, if we're ever going to be, we're out in the middle of nowhere and nobody knows us, and, we don't know people, and we're not anywhere near where anything literary is happening. When I was becoming a writer, I was a typesetter in Portland, Oregon. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know anybody who was doing anything. And so you have to kind of include yourself in the literary conversation, even if you feel like you're in the outer planets. And one of the things that Scott talks about in Culture Crash is our capitalistic winner-takes-all approach to culture, meaning that instead of having 15 magazines that carry short stories, you have the New Yorker. I guess you have, from time to time, the Atlantic. The multiplicity of venues, we're getting to the point everybody's taking the New York Times, whereas it used to be there were every town had a newspaper, had a daily, often a daily, and a big city would have 2 or 3 newspapers. And really, there were functioning record companies that actually paid their artists. Now, there's like 1 store, 2 stores. Everybody goes to, the big A, or the huge Walmarts or whatever. And so we're developing this sort of monoculture. And it would be I think at Christmas time especially, if you are a writer, and you think, oh, well, I'll subscribe to the New Yorker and I'll know what's going on. You know, this is a subscription that supports the monoculture. If you want to be a part of and feel a part of a literary community and growing a community that will support its, you know, wider members and bring people in, you know, the more points of contact that don't require a big system of agentry and what have you, that the literary journals are those first constellations that bring you in from the great wastes of deep space. And so I wanted to talk a bit about the literary journals. If you are looking for a gift to give somebody or for yourself, the literary journals are the first step in from the cold. And they don't support themselves. You know, if you are writing short stories, if you are writing fiction, and you don't subscribe to at least one or two literary journals besides the monoculture, besides, hey Peggy, you know, besides the monoculture, you know, not just, yeah, you have your subscription to the New Yorker, but do you support a literary journal or two? And I would always say start local when you start sending your work out. Start locally. Start with your region, with your area. So in Southern California, where I live, there is the ones I like. One went under, Black Clock, was a real crime, and a lot of great literature came out of that. And if you supported it, you saw that literature first. If you went to their readings, you started seeing the same people. You start realizing, oh, this is a community. Each journal is a community. And you not only support it, but you become part of that community. You're no longer circling the outer planets. You're no longer buying the Kardashians, or the literary equivalent of that, you know, the thing that everybody buys. The monoculture, you know, just supporting the corporate monoculture. These are quirky, individualistic, you know, selections of literary art. Locally, I would say the Santa Monica Review. So many people have gotten their first publication there. So many people have published in the Santa Monica Review, are part of that community. The most beautiful readings they have at the often at the Broad Stage in Santa Monica. The Santa Monica Review. It's all fiction, and I believe, do they have poetry? Well, this one is certainly all fiction, and just a wonderful mix of people you've heard of and people you haven't heard of, and people you probably will hear. You know, if you start reading it, you'll start, oh yeah, I like that person's work. I like that person's work, you know. And then when they have a novel or they have something else that comes out in the New Yorker, saw them in the Santa Monica Review. Then, being Californian, Ziziva is the other one that I love. Ziziva, I support them. They're in the Bay Area, but it's regional. So I think of California as my region. West Coast is my region. I liked Tin House. That closed. So we lost two of my favorites, but we have a couple more. And then if you like poetry, I love Rattle. magazine. And Rattle is all poetry, and they have themes, but the themes are only half the magazine. The other half is whatever comes in that they really like. The guy who runs these all have, the editors are like strong personalities. Santa Monica Review is Andrew Tonkovich, who is, I know from Squaw Valley. He teaches up there and is very much involved with that. And if you ever want to work with him, it's going to be this summer. Worth it. And then Oscar Villalon is the editor of Zizova, and a really dynamic individual. And he also comes to Squaw Valley and teaches. That's where I met him. So this is community. So we go from the journals, and then there's also the Squaw Valley community of writers. Rattle is edited by Tim Green, who was a student of mine and a wonderful short story writer. Go back to fiction writing, but he's a wonderful editor, poetry editor, and he has a show on is it a podcast? On YouTube, anyway, Rattle Magazine, where he actually actively edits poems right in front of you, so you can see the thought processes. This is wonderful, and so I collect all three. If you go to my house, you'll see them in the bathroom, and where I downstairs bathroom. Every room has its own kind of library, so that's where the journals live. But it's their community, and its community is formed from the bottom up, not from the top down. So when you think, oh, I read all the best stuff in the New Yorker, but what community is that? What community? Are you part of the New Yorker community as a writer? Whereas if you're in the Midwest and you just take two, or better yet, if you know if you have a small group of reader or writer friends, like 4 or 5, and each person subscribes to one, and then everybody will get the new issues, and you can pass them around and really see what's going on. How do you find the good journals? There's, you look in Best American and you see where they're pulling from. But don't stop with the New Yorker and the Paris Review, a wonderful journal. But don't stop there. See what's happening in the smaller journals that are also being noticed, because they need your support. They all need your support. But the smaller journals, it's like the local newspaper. I mean, this is where the grassroots work is being done. This is where you're going to see people first. This is where you're going to see your own work first. And also become part of a community, which is absolutely invaluable. But other journals, certainly you're going to want to, have the occasional copy of Granta, Freeman's, Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, Southern Review, Georgia Review, New England Review, Puerto del Sol, Threepenny Review. This is your world. This keeps the monoculture from thoroughly taking over. Because what Scott talked about in Culture Crash was the winner takes all model of American culture, so that we all are watching the same 5 people. We're hearing about the same 5 people. We're reading the same 5 bestsellers. And as writers, you want to be a little bit more aware of how the process works, and actually, maybe bypassing a few cups of overpriced coffee and subscribing to a literary journal. They're much cheaper to subscribe to than they are to buy in individual issues. But to maybe subscribe to one and then occasionally buy another if there's, say, a writer that interests you who published there, or again, investigating your regional journals. The situation with writing for free, literary journals in Portland, Oregon. I think if you're in Portland, Oregon, it'll be easier for you to find them. You know, unfortunately, you lost Tin House. But I guarantee you, if you go to Powell's bookstore, any good bookstore, and look at the journals or talk to the bookseller, you will find an interesting array of local journals. And then you can sit down and take a look at them and decide wow, that's a good story. You know, so buy it. Read the whole thing. See what you think. Go to their reading when the journal comes out the next time. See that community forming. That's right. Definitely ask Powell's. They're bookstores, and that's part of the community too. They're bookstores that become hubs for literary community. This is harder if you live in a region where if you live in a region where it's a 2-hour drive to a good bookstore. But if you happen to be in that city, that you've got a flight out of there, or you're visiting relatives, or make it a point on your next trip to your cultural hub, whatever it might be, to go to that book. Just put it on the list, just drop in at that bookstore, see what's going on, journals, see if they're, be on their mailing list and see when their readings are. I mean, if you live in a big city, there's readings all the time, and in LA we have like 7 amazing independent bookstores. Maybe you only have a Barnes and Noble, if you're lucky. If you live in the middle of nowhere, I certainly lived in the middle of nowhere, and my bookstore was a regional hub, which was Tattered Cover in Denver. And I was living in a tiny little mountain town, but that was my hub, man. I would order books from them, I never would buy books from the big A, which didn't exist at the time, but I would follow, I get a newsletter from them in the mail in those days, and I would use their 800 number and make phone calls. And whenever I was in Denver, I would go and try to hit a reading or see what was going on at Tattered Cover. And now I will go on book tour, and and go to Tattered Cover. I was there for my birthday when Revolution of Marina M came out. So it's a network of communities, and it's something that people don't think a lot about. They think about trying to get something good on the page, but there is this crushing loneliness, this crushing feeling where I am circling the outer planets out here and nobody knows I exist and nobody gives a damn, at least on the literary level, about my project. Nobody cares really about what I'm doing here, but other readers and writers. And most of the readers of literary journals are writers. Although I certainly have friends who are tremendous readers and they are not writers, but even they really enjoy a subscription to a journal for Christmas. It comes in the mail, and it's a gift that you get 4 times a year, or 2 times a year. I've always, and it's a great late Christmas gift. If you're late and it's like, oh my God, I forgot to get, Cousin Judy something, you think, God, it might be interesting to give Cousin Judy a gift subscription to Ziziva. Why not? Uh, so, because you just put a card saying that, I've just subscribed for this for you and keep an eye out. You don't have to do anything, or you don't get the wrong size. It's the perfect gift. But it's like forming, and then you form community, and community means reading people's books when they come out, friends of yours or people in your, who you think are good writers in your community, supporting them, supporting the local journals, and thinking about the monoculture, think about what's being sold to you, buying actual physical products of that person, like musicians, you know, buy their CD. I know you can stream their stuff and absolutely pay them nothing, and get to enjoy the work of their months and years of labor. But that really is stealing from the artist, and you know it, and I know it. And yeah, I listen to Spotify or whatever monster rapist corporation is sucking the blood out of our musical scene. I listen to it, but I do make a point, if I like something, to go out and get a CD. It really is the difference between artists being able to make a living and artists in despair, who stop working, and only the people who have trust funds are going to make culture, which is that is hideously wrong. And it's, why should we just pretend we don't see it and pretend it doesn't matter? It matters terrifically. So anything else we can talk about? But I did want to talk about Scott and talk about Culture Crash, which I've given away. I always give my guy. It's like I buy it and then I give it to someone. I buy it again and give it to somebody. It's that kind of a eye-opening look at our world, and the way the internet. We love the internet. I mean, look, I get to talk to you on the internet. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the internet per se. It does connect us, it does expose us to things, but artists need to be able to keep a roof over their head and eat. And you get these trolls who say, well, screw them, if they can't get enough people to pay them, then, so what? I mean, the culture of free is willfully ignoring the reality that culture workers are physically incarnate people, and they actually do still need to go to the dentist and put gas in their car. And, when Iggy Pop is looking for a job because the money all goes to what did Scott say? The money goes to the people selling maps, to the looting. It all goes to the, Amazon doesn't make anything. Spotify doesn't make anything. They don't make anything. They just give you stuff for free or underpriced and show you how to get it. And they're, worth billions, and they're not paying any taxes at all, and they're not hiring babysitters, and they're not putting the money back into circulation. I mean, this is a big economic issue that our country has to deal with somehow, or we're going to just be hollowed out. Our souls will be hollowed out. There will be no more cultural workers in America. So we, as cultural workers, need to support the whole project. So does anybody have a favorite literary journal out there? Who do you read? It depends on your region, but every region has wonderful literary journals, and so I've shared a few of mine. I've been published in Black Warrior Review out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, an amazing journal, and it's been just tough to avoid in this and fast-moving world that's, I mean, I wrote about the revolution, and I'm seeing the revolution, and I'm seeing the speed of change and things I don't like. You have to kind of also look at the things that are happening that are new and interesting. I'm mourning the demise of Tin House and of Black Clock. There are new journals all the time. There's new journals, there's new books. There are opening, and bookstores are finding ways to stay open. One of our big regional, probably our biggest regional hub in Southern California is Vroman's, and Vroman's bookstore just opened a big wine their store so that after reading you can have a nice glass of wine, or you can meet somebody. And I've seen that in Italian bookstores, that you see at grocery store and restaurant, and not just the coffee, not just the cappuccino machine, but like a wine, like a bar. There's one Italian bookstore I saw, independent, that had 3 stories, and there was one of them had a like a specialty grocery store, one had a wine bar, and one had a restaurant, each floor. So it becomes a destination, these bookstores. If you can buy from the bookstores, then there will be bookstores, and we can avoid this world, this winner takes all monstrosity that just sucks the money out of publishing, out of the writer's pocket, and eventually forces people who cannot support their work to go into other lines of work, and will be the poorer for it. So any favorite journals? I mean, you really must subscribe to at least one journal, and 2 if you I hope that's not making you feel bad, but the culture is an ongoing, lively process, and it's the entry, the door, the friendly doors where at street level is where that's being made. So the journals is where it's happening, always. The most interesting stuff is going to be in the journals. You might not see it in the New Yorker. They have a very specific kind of program there. Well, in the absence of questions or contributions, I'd like to wish you, sorry for the depressing thing, but as the Stoics would say, it is what it is, and that's my life, and you process your art out of your life and not out of some, Disney-esque fantasy. So this is my life, and don't forget that the journals make amazing gifts. Books make amazing gifts, and journals will really make amazing gifts because they keep coming. All right, thank you very much. See you next week. Bye.